Well, good afternoon, and welcome everybody, and a very special welcome to the National Park Foundation Board of Directors. We're delighted to have you here. Now, I would just like to find out how many people are here for the first time on the Schoodic campus. Well, that's great. Now remember, this is the first time. We hope you'll be here many, many more times. We're here to celebrate the partnership we have with Acadia National Park. It's a very unusual situation. There are a number of research centers in many of the national parks, but this one is different. First, it's the largest of all the ones, but more than that, it's a partnership between a public and a private enterprise. Schoodic Institute is a private partnership with the Acadia National Park, and it's a seamless partnership at all levels, from the top between me and Sheridan and all of our staff down. And it's worked out just beautifully. Now, about a year ago, our board decided that it was time to bring in a new CEO. So Sam Hefner, our vice chairman, put together a wonderful search committee. That search committee did a national search. They interviewed over 40 people, and they selected a winner. And that winner is Mark Berry. Now, Mark came to us. He was the CEO of the Northeast Land Trust. He took that little company from a small company and he built it into a very successful organization. He's been with us just a few months, started June 1st. He's made a miraculous difference in Schoodic already. So I want to welcome Mark to the floor.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, everybody. It is an honor for me to be here today and to welcome all of you to Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park. I am here today because I believe there is no better place to engage in the critical effort to conserve our environment in a changing world. Schoodic Institute is powerfully positioned because of our partnership with Acadia National Park. We face two threats. First, rapid environmental change in our climate and in our acidifying ocean has the potential to disrupt the natural systems that sustain us, our economies, and our quality of life. Second, we face the threat of a future in which our population may be ill-prepared to understand and to care for our natural world. Schoodic Institute is addressing these challenges head-on. We are connecting people to nature through science and art. We are engaging citizen scientists of all ages to help gather information vitally needed at Acadia National Park and throughout our region. We're here to celebrate our partnership and the great work underway. We've reached and inspired thousands of students, hundreds of teachers, and some of the millions of people who love Acadia National Park. We're celebrating a beginning achieved through hard work and generosity, but most of our effort lies ahead. We have a tremendous opportunity. We must and we will sustain this work for the long term. I hope you'll be inspired today to join in the effort, support us, share our story, bring a group to our campus, help us make new connections. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Mr. David Rockefeller, Jr. Mr. Rockefeller has served, as you may be well aware, in many distinguished roles. Perhaps most notable for us today are his interests in our national parks and our oceans. He served as vice chair of the National Park Foundation, a member of the Pew Oceans Commission, and as a founder and the chairman of Sailors for the Sea. He's also a current member of Schoodic Institute's Advisory Council. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rockefeller.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. And Secretary Jewell, Director Jarvis, Superintendent Steele, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have to say I have great pride in my forebears' role, my ancestors' role in especially here in eastern Maine and Acadia National Park. John D. Rockefeller Jr., for whom this Rockefeller Hall was named, is my grandfather, and I'm glad to see that the building is in such great shape a year since I saw it. So thanks for taking such good care of it. We are, as a nation, I believe, thirsting for connection, for quiet, and for a deeper understanding of nature. National parks, and Acadia in particular, can provide this, and now are doing so through Schoodic Institute and the Center. I grew up summers in Seal Harbor, just across Frenchman's Bay, where the moss and the mussel shells were part of the vocabulary of my early experience. Fishing for cod, not so many of them today, and sailing the bold coast were two things I learned to love early. Those connections were part of my early education, and the memories of hiking the Acadia trails and granite beaches have never left me. My wife Susan and I, as some of you have heard me say, use a mantra, protect what is precious. And for us, that particularly means family, art, and nature. Schoodic Institute, I'm thrilled to observe, involves all three. Schoodic Institute expands the traditional role of a national park beyond just a vacation destination, although that's a noble purpose as well, into a regional and community catalyst for ecosystem research, conservation training, and education. Schoodic Institute can and will serve as a model for research learning centers across the country. The Institute provides research and lifelong learning, something I'm increasingly grateful for. Lifelong learning, both the life and the learning. Lifelong learning opportunities tied to its extraordinary setting in Acadia National Park, really one of the world's greatest national and natural laboratories. The evolution of Schoodic Institute and the development of the CERC campus are major milestones in the nearly century-long history of Acadia National Park. They offer great potential locally, nationally, and internationally. Now, citizen involvement has been central to making Acadia great. The Institute's work through its science, research, and education programs and its collaborative ventures offer opportunities for engagement to all ages, from young children to senior citizens. In fact, my own father, now 99 years old, still makes daily forays in his carriage onto the Acadia roads, and by the way, Sheridan still comments on views that should be cleared out again. So I ask each of you to engage with Schoodic Institute and to assist Acadia National Park in providing a model research learning center on this campus. And now I invite Neil Mulholland, President and CEO of the National Park Foundation, and Sheridan Steele, the great and long-serving superintendent of Acadia National Park, to the podium. Thanks to all of you for being here and for being you.
What happened there?
We made a little change. I wanted to say just a few words before Sheridan gets up here. Recently, USA Today had an article that said that Acadia National Park is the #1 national park in the United States. You know, that didn't happen by accident. It happened because, in our opinion, we have the #1 park superintendent in the country. And I didn't want him to get up here without us really honoring Sheridan, his steadfast determination on any idea that he gets will stick with it until it finally happens. It started a little bit when we first began our relationship with the park 7 years ago, and you have seen and will see in the next few years all the incredible things that came from his vision. So Sheridan, you can't get up here without having that kind of an introduction.
Well, thank you, Alan, for those kind words. It is wonderful to be here today and look out on this beautiful campus and this wonderful crowd. Any success that we've enjoyed at Acadia National Park really belongs to all of the many volunteers, the donors, the partners, and our employees, because we do it as one giant team effort, and we're all hoping for the same thing, which is a wonderful Acadia National Park and Schoodic Institute long into the future. So with that, I just wanted to add a couple remarks about the purpose of a research learning center and CERC here on this campus. I think if any of you were going to start a research learning center, you would start small. You'd maybe get a building and focus on that, and you grow it from there. Well, we did not have that luxury. We inherited this giant place as a research learning center. We've torn down 16 buildings, and we've invested $22 million into making this into the campus you see today. In fact, the barracks was behind me. The administration building was over here where these trees are. There was a warehouse over here. The dining hall was back here. That's all gone. And we now have what I would call a really beautiful campus. But what are you going to do with a campus? Well, of course, what we want to do with this campus is make it into a very important education and research center benefiting not only Acadia, but all national parks. And we want to engage the next generation of stewards and people of all ages into research and education related to Acadia. Just a couple quick stories. We had 16 students from Worcester Polytech Institute here for 8 weeks. They brought a professor. They divided into 4 groups, and the point of their class up here at Acadia was to solve problems, but to solve real life problems, things that might make a difference. And so one of the groups focused on night sky, and one focused on natural sounds. And these engineering students spent the entire summer working on these issues, and then they reported to park management on their recommendations. And it was really valuable for them and for us. They particularly liked getting to know National Park Service professionals, experts in various fields, working alongside them, asking them questions, learning from them. They also particularly liked the fact that what they were doing was meaningful, that it meant something to a national park, something that they really respected and they wanted to give back to. So when they left, after their report, I asked them, so how would you grade this experience? And of course, they all had really great things to say about how valuable it was to them. And I said, well, given the overall experience on a 1 to 10, how would you rate it? And the first young woman raised her hand and she said, I'd give it a 12. She said, this really meant a lot to me. It's really changed my perspective and so forth. We have a Teacher Ranger teacher program that brings teachers here, and they work in the park for the summer and then go back to their schools. And they help us develop curriculum-based programs for schools where they can take a bit of National Park back to their schools. Those are just 2 examples of how we think the future of the Schoodic Education Research Center campus can serve a growing number of partners and groups to help them get inspired by Acadia National Park and help them learn more about us as we learn more about ourselves and about the resources. So it's an extremely important role. They're going to help us manage into the future with this rapidly changing climate. And it's really going to depend, success is going to depend on bringing more and more partners here, more and more educators and researchers to help us move into the future. And I wanted to close with just two stories. The first one came from a friend of mine who's here today, Chip Jenkins. He just told me this story a little while ago. He was up on Cadillac for sunrise this morning. And he said that the sun was kind of hiding in the clouds. There were some clouds, and then it kind of, all of a sudden the clouds depressed and the sun started coming up. And of course there was a big crowd up there. He said the entire parking lot was full at, what was that, 5:30, 6 o'clock this morning, Chip? So anyway, he said that one young man, a child of maybe 10 or 12, said to his father, "This is the coolest thing we've done all year." So, and then the other story is somewhat similar in that I was walking along the shore one day and there was I would say an 8-year-old girl down at right at the water's edge, and her parents were walking above, and she yelled at them, "Mom, Dad, get down here quick. This place is awesome." And to me, that the message in both of those is inspiration. And, you know, if we can connect kids to Acadia National Park and the natural environment and inspire them and have them take that home, I think we've succeeded. And I think the Schoodic Education and Research Center and Schoodic Institute are going to help us do that in a much bigger way. Thank you. And so it's my pleasure now to introduce Neil Mulholland, the President and CEO of the National Park Foundation, who was in the private sector for 30 years and who's just taken this job on as of 2009, I believe. So, Neil.
Well, the National Park Foundation is thrilled to be here today. That's why we have the totality of the board here. And what the National Park Foundation does is we create public-private partnerships across the national park system. And what we do is invite the private sector in to come help us, help the service, and enhance that margin of excellence of the great work that they do, and also to improve the visitor experience. The reason we're here today is because what's been touched on earlier are the fabulous leadership, the groundbreaking work you're doing here, and the entrepreneurial thinking that's taking place. You are very blessed to have Sheridan Steele as your superintendent. He's a terrific partner, worked very closely with Sheridan, and he's a forward-thinking. Alan Goldstein is another great partner in the work that's happening here at the Schoodic Institute, and Mark Berry, who's newly joined. And then David McDonald's here as well, who leads Friends of Acadia. And so it's through those groups that create the opportunity for us to move our national parks into the next 100 years. And the only thing that's missing right now is the rest of you. You have a great opportunity here with this great facility that runs these wonderful programs at Schoodic. You have one of the best parks in the world, not only the United States of America, but the system that has truly unique things that have been shared with us today. So we're thrilled to be here. We're here to learn in the great work that's happening here day in and day out. And we congratulate you. And we also encourage you from the area to get involved with Schoodic Institute or Friends of Acadia. Thank you.
I'll wing it. Yeah. Hi, I'm John Jarvis, the Director of the National Park Service. And thank you for all coming out this afternoon. It's a fantastic day in this wonderful part of the world. You know, Sheridan, Mark, Alan, David, Sally, you know, it's just great to have you all here. Alan's been pestering me for years now to come up and to bring Sally and really see what you are doing here at Schoodic. And it is very impressive. I have to say, I came in 2002, looked a little different. In my job, often you're brought to these places and you have to use your imagination about what it could be. And you've absolutely executed on that vision. You have provided an extraordinary place to bring scientists and young people and educators together to address some of the most important issues that are facing us in the National Park Service, if not the nation. You're also, and one of the reasons that I really wanted the National Park Foundation Board to come to Acadia is because in many ways this is the place that the relationship between philanthropy and land conservation really began. There is such a wonderful legacy here of individual activism and such a deep love for this place that translated into conservation by individuals through philanthropy, through community involvement that established this place and turned it into what it is today and its economic power, its contributions to the state of Maine and to the nation, and wound up getting voted the best. I did like the fact that Alan has picked up on this whole concept of competitiveness and recognizing that this research center is bigger and more and better than it's a whole thing in the national parks. You know, my park is bigger than your park, and so forth. You know, we are recognizing and have recognized for some time, and I think even more now, that our national parks are incredibly important for a variety of reasons. They are obviously economic generators and places for visitors to reconnect to nature and to history, but they are also great reserves of biodiversity. They are home to threatened and endangered species. They are refugia for species that are being driven by climate. And so the National Park Service, probably a decade or more ago, decided that we were really going to invest in understanding what the baseline of these places are, that we would have a robust inventory and monitoring program so that we could sort of figure out where the needle is now and being able to measure that as stressors came on. And there were a few scientists out there who were saying you need to be paying attention to climate change, but it had really not built up the groundswell that it has today. I've been in the service 37 years and have worked all across the nation, and I personally have seen the impacts of climate change in my career. The glaciers at Mount Rainier and Olympic and North Cascades, places where I've worked, are receding. Lake Mead, a park I had responsibility for in the Pacific West, has dropped nearly half of its fill. It's fed by the Colorado River, and the drought in the West has Lake Mead lower than it has ever been since it was being filled. The wildfires that are burning in the West are burning almost a month longer than they would be in the past. And we are seeing species migrate north and up. And you can only go up so far until you pop off the top as well. We see alpine habitats completely disappearing as trees encroach, driven by climate change. We're seeing bark beetles that survive the winter and really ravage the western forests. And in some of our parks, we actually have the potential of losing the namesake. Glacier National Park within 20 or 30 years will have no glaciers. And Joshua Tree National Park will have no Joshua trees. Obviously here in Acadia, you are seeing also effects in terms of destructive insects and vector-borne diseases and storm events that perhaps you have not seen in the past as well. And certainly the acidification of the ocean that poses an extraordinary threat to all those little animals out there that require a certain pH in order to create their shells. The seasons are changing, and it has all these cascading effects to our national parks. But I'm not here to depress you. I'm here to say that the Park Service is not taking this laying down. We have actually a strategy around this, and frankly, the National Park Service, along with protected areas around the world, are working together to recognize that national parks are an antidote in many ways to the effects of climate change. We have a very robust program. I mentioned the monitoring side, but we also have mitigation, we have education, and we have adaptation, all in play across the system. And here at the Schoodic Education Research Center, you're actually putting all of those pieces together on the ground in an incredible place that inspires science as well as individuals that are here to learn about the future. We have sort of a framework that we are thinking about this, is that, if we're going to be making decisions about the future of these places, we need to have the best available science to guide those decisions. And we are in this for the long haul. We have to make these decisions in the long-term public interest, not in the short term as well. I served as an incident commander on the Gulf oil spill for a number of months down there. And there was a little bit of a silver lining, and that was that we had baseline inventory already in place for the 9 national parks that are in the Gulf, so that we already knew what the conditions of those resources were because we had been monitoring this for over a decade. Many of the other areas there, they had no idea, really, and so it was very hard to measure the impact over time as well. So we're applying this data as each and every one of you are here today to celebrate. We don't do this alone. We do it in partnership. And I know through our Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit, which are very actively involved here at Schoodic as well, we bring university scientists, private citizens, and the like across the board. Every employee in the National Park Service today will be dealing with some aspect of climate change in their career through the rest of their time within the National Park Service. So we're also adjusting sort of how we think about national parks. So in 1963, A. Starker Leopold, son of Aldo Leopold, wrote a report called the Leopold Report. And he basically said that at the time they weren't thinking about climate change. They said that your job, National Park Service, is to create vignettes of primitive America, essentially recreate sort of a pre-contact look about the national parks. And it sounds a little weird, but at least you can visualize what that is, right? So you bring back bison, you bring back wolves to Yellowstone, you restore fire to the system, you save all the parts, as they say when you're tinkering with nature. And what we're realizing today is that paradigm is frankly no longer viable, because we are seeing change across the system driven by climate that are basically saying we cannot recreate vignettes of primitive America because that no longer exists, and we can't just hold it in some sort of stasis. So we have to have a new paradigm. So we brought together a group of scientists, 2 Nobel laureates, 2 members of the National Academy of Scientists, a former director of the National Science Foundation, the winner of the National Medal of Science. And where did we bring them? To Schoodic. We brought them here, and they sat out on the deck and began to think about the planning for the future of our national parks. So in many ways, once again, Acadia, like it was the beginning of citizen involvement, of philanthropy, of conservation ethic in this country, it is also the center for rethinking how we are going to manage these incredible places for the next generation. And so we're all in this together. Please have faith that the National Park Service has not taken any of this lightly. And I think that we are learning every day how to build in resilience into our system, how to protect our species, how to give them corridors to the next protected area as well. And there could be really no greater champion for this, or no person I can think of who has been willing to take on this broader challenge than our current Secretary, Sally Jewell. She has made climate change, she's talked about climate change openly to anyone that wants to listen. She's talked about engaging the next generation and connecting them to these incredible places and getting them involved from day one. And I think, at least in my almost 40 years in the National Park Service, I think she knows more about our national parks and our public lands than any secretary I've worked for in my career. Sally Jewell.
Thank you, John. Gosh, what a great crowd. thank you all for coming out for this wonderful day in Acadia National Park. And yeah, it's a little overcast, but this is Acadia. It's overcast sometimes. It's good. That's why I bought my puffy coat. I'm feeling really good about that. So thank you, all of you on the podium, for your remarks, for your dedication, for your leadership, for your philanthropy, the organizations you represent, the Schoodic Institute, the National Park Foundation, the Friends of Acadia. You know, it takes a village to raise a national park system. And that's not new. Acadia is an example of that village in action from its very early days. From the contributions of philanthropists, from the sweat equity of volunteers, from the commitment of the folks that wear the green and gray, from the volunteers that support them every day, from people who write checks and people that advocate, and people that come out and do research and do their citizen science. It's people that care. So congratulations, Maine, on this wonderful national park that is not only a place of enjoyment, but it is a place of economic activity. Talk to anybody that's got a business in Bar Harbor, or maybe I should say Bar Harbor, trying to get used to it. And how you call it desert island, or desert island when it's spelled desert island, I'm not sure, but I'll get that down. Mark, you gotta learn that. You keep saying desert, but really it's dessert, right? Am I right? Okay. So I'm not new to Acadia National Park. I first came here when John was a baby applying for his job at the National Park Service. It was 37 years ago. I was on an epic trip. It's the only summer that I took off from college, and I got in my Fiat Red 124 Sport Coupe by myself in my little yellow cooler and my Frostline Kits tent, and I drove from National Park to National Park to National Park to beautiful scenic rivers. Went to Craters of the Moon. That's another place that John actually did early career in. I had some very memorable experiences on that trip. I woke up in just outside of Yellowstone National Park with a looked like bullwinkle right in front of my tent. I thought I really have to go to a bathroom, but I don't have to go that bad. I was by myself. I had a CB radio. My handle was what my boyfriend called me at the time, which was Kiddo. I used to talk to truckers. They'd ask me to come meet them for coffee. I politely declined. But I made my way across the country with some very, very memorable experiences, all the way down to Florida and the Everglades, off to see a friend in Jamaica, all the way up the East Coast. And my boyfriend at the time met me in Philadelphia, and we drove up here to Acadia. He's now my husband, 36 years. Good wave. So we had a rainy experience in Acadia, right? It's rainy. We had my Frostline Kit tent. Thing held up in spite of my sewing abilities. And I remember a very memorable night. You know, on a trip like that, 15,000 miles on my car, and it was a Fiat, and it still made it, which is unbelievable. But one of the best memories I have is of Warren and I sitting in the tent eating lobster with butter in the rain outside. So it was pretty special. This is my fourth visit to Acadia. I was here just under 2 years ago. I toured the Schoodic Institute with Mike Sukup. Got a sense of the vision. The Rockefeller building was a construction zone. You could barely see in through the dust in the windows, and how far you have come. So congratulations, Schoodic Institute, congratulations, Sheridan and the National Park Service on what an incredible building that is and what an incredible resource this is, because it will change lives. So it's easy to see why ABC Good Morning America rated this America's favorite place. I know it's not going to be easy on the people around us wearing green and gray being America's favorite place, because it just means that they're going to be dealing with a lot more people in addition to the 130 cruise ships that come in, and how do you protect this resource, how do you share this resource but not love it to death. So I want to talk just a little bit about this job that I walked into and trends that we're experiencing and how this impacts all of us. So my last day job in retail, selling backpacks for a living, we talked a lot about what do we see 20, 30, 40 years down the road and how do we prepare for that. You know, people sell businesses short, saying they're short-term focused. Businesses actually think a lot about the future and where am I needing to go and how do I change for that. So I came to this job thinking, what are the big factors that are impacting us? And there's three big ones that I just want to talk about. And John zeroed in on one, I'm going to zero in on another. But the three are, one, we are operating at a time of constrained resources. You know, in general, in the United States, people want to pay less tax. They also want more service, and that dog don't hunt. And we are now at a time when you're not going to get more for less, you're going to get less for less. And we have to make really, really difficult choices about things we really care about, because the amount of the discretionary budget in the federal government is going down, and it is really stretching the resources that we have here. So I will say that my first year in this job, 2013, was really bad timing. So sequestration, remember that? Sequestration was a miserable way to run anything. I think of my job as being in the forever business. You would like Acadia National Park to stay in this the way it is forever. John's told you there are some things that are impacting it that may not make it the same way that it was, but nonetheless, we want this place to be here for many generations to come. David talked about a 99-year-old father. That building is named for your grandfather. Many generations have said this is a special place, how do we protect it? And yet, with constrained resources, with sequestration and budget cuts, it was really hard. And I'll tell you what the #1 sport seemed to be last year in this country, and it was not baseball or apple pie or anything like that. It was putting down federal employees. So I want you to join me in a round of applause for all of our federal employees who are here. Thank you. The men and women in the green and gray, the volunteers that support them, the other units of federal government, and frankly, local and state government service that are here, these can be jobs that people take for granted. They can be thankless jobs, and yet you hear, every time you come out to a place like Acadia, and you meet somebody who's out greeting you, or helping you in through the gate, or interpreting something for you, or rescuing you when you've done something that, in retrospect, you wish you hadn't done. You will find dedication and commitment to mission and just a positive attitude, even though we're making life pretty difficult for them in our budgets and our bureaucracies and everything else. So we are at a time of constrained resources in this country. And the work of the National Park Foundation, the work of the Friends of Acadia, the work of the Schoodic Institute should be the margin of excellence for our parks and our public lands. It should not be the margin of survival. But in the last few years, it's become more and more of the margin of survival as we've leaned more heavily into philanthropists and we lean more heavily into volunteers. And that is good. It gives everybody a sense of ownership in this park, but the basics we need to cover, the careers of the people that are wearing the green and gray all around us, making room and space for people who want to volunteer their time, which actually requires some volunteer coordination, are all things that are realities for us as we operate in this time of constrained resources. So that's trend one. Trend two is a generational transformation in this country. So I look out over this crowd and I say that the baby boomers have it by maybe 10 to 1, maybe 10 to 2. So baby boom generation born between 1946 and 1964. I was born in 1956. I'll spare you the math, it means I'm 58. So you don't have to do that quick math in your head, just easier. Look it up on Wikipedia, too. I don't try and hide it. One article written about me said, silver-haired and sinewy, and I thought, ooh. I'll try to take that as a compliment. Anyway, there are 76 million baby boomers in this country. The generation after us, Gen X, born between 1965 and 1979, are 49 million, much smaller generation. And then coming up behind them, there may be a few in the audience, not very many, the millennial generation, born between 1980 and 1995. There are 79 million already. And I got some bad news for the baby boomers out there. They're going to outnumber us by 30 million by 2030. you can figure out why. Some of us are not going to be here. So, demographics, you know, we're going to live longer, but not that long. So, what do we do when we have this incredible base of knowledge that has been here for their entire careers? The scientists, the wildlife biologists, the law enforcement rangers that know how you gracefully make sure people have a safe park experience, not just for them, but for others. All of these all this knowledge and experience that will be retiring soon, if they're not on the way out the door now. And how do we, can't just rely on the Gen Xers because there aren't enough of them. How do we train up a new generation? When you combine that with constrained resources, we are not on a good trajectory right now, and that's something that I'm very committed to changing while I'm at the Department of Interior. Because we need to make room for young people. We need to make room for a mind meld between the young and the ready to retire, the young and the young at heart. I'll call us that. How about that, John? Is that good? Okay. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about my commitment to doing that in a minute. The third big trend is what John talked about, and that is climate change. I see it everywhere I go. I took one amazing trip last year where I was on the North Slope of Alaska, some of it with oil companies, some with Alaska Natives, some in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is a spectacular place if you ever get a chance to go up there. In the village of Kaktovik, Alaska, where I landed in a small plane, the runway is washing away. Why? Because the pack ice is moving out weeks sooner, and that ocean is battering the shorelines, and the shorelines are falling away. Archaeological sites that have been there for time immemorial are washing into the water. The runway in Kaktovik was washing into the water and is being relocated inland. Later on in that trip, I flew, part of the portfolio of the Department of Interior has to do with the insular areas in the Pacific and the Caribbean. So I flew to a meeting of the Pacific Island Forum in the Marshall Islands. Marshall Islands, where the average height above sea level is 6 feet. What did I see there? Same thing as Kaktovik. The runway was lined with sandbags, trying to keep the runway in place so the planes didn't fall in the water. We used the Marshall Islands during World War II. It's one of the reasons why we are supporting that community and so many others in the Pacific. It doesn't take much sea level rise. It doesn't take much of a storm before the Marshall Islands are inundated. And this is their home. This is what they've known. These are some of the people that taught us all about navigation, about navigating their way around these atolls in the Pacific. So climate change is everywhere. Historic Jamestown, another national park site, part of the Colonial National Park down in Virginia. 98 feet of coastline have washed away there due to sea level rise, including about half of what was an earthen fort from the Civil War. So John described a lot of the issues. It is one of the main reasons I took this job, because it's going to take all of us working together to address climate change. And we will be needing to adapt. We will need to be more resilient. We will need to learn from Mother Nature. Schoodic Institute is a great place where we can learn from Mother Nature. My colleagues at the USGS are working not only with folks here, but also did some smart things like mapping the whole East Coast before Hurricane Sandy hit, and then mapping it after Hurricane Sandy hit, saying, you know what? Where we had the Edwin Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge, it took 22 miles of debris from the storm, but it protected the community behind. There are examples of where green infrastructure did a far better job than gray infrastructure. So what can we learn as city managers? What can we learn as land managers? What can we do to prepare our landscapes for a time of climate change while doing our part to slow our contributions to climate change? So I want to come back to something that we all care about, which is how we engage that next generation. So John focused quite a bit about the science and how important the science is. What's happening here in the Schoodic Institute is something pretty exciting, which is not just direct science, but engaging the next generation in science. Engaging kids in working with dragonfly larvae dragonfly nymphs, to measure mercury levels in bodies of water across over 40 national parks. Kids may not be able to do the lab work for the mercury, but kids can have a fun time. Who doesn't like to get muddy? Well, who didn't like to get muddy? Maybe not so much anymore, but believe me, there was a time when you liked mud, I guarantee you. So I think back over what shaped me as an individual. David talked a little bit about his experiences growing up as a sailor, someone that enjoyed these amazing landscapes. I grew up with parents that really cared, that signed me up for these 2-week trips. And they were 2-week trips out in nature. But they were 2-week trips in nature with graduate students. I say students because the students could only stand us for a week at a time when we were on 2-week trips, so we had 4 grad students over 2 weeks. And I just couldn't understand why they really cared about having a shower. You know, it just was the furthest thing from my mind. One of the 2-week trips was on an island much like some of the little uninhabited islands that I saw coming over here in the Park Service boat. We mapped out the island topographically. We set up camp. We learned about marine biology. We learned about topography. And those lessons stayed with me. Another trip, east and west side of the Cascade Mountains, I learned how to identify trees. And when I got the name of a tree right, they'd give me a piece of beef jerky. How's that for Pavlov's reaction? I remember the taste of that beef jerky today. But I also remember that Pseudotsuga menzizii is the name of a Douglas fir tree. And I can still tell you what it looks like. I had an opportunity as a child to join the climbing club in my high school. I wonder how many high schools have climbing clubs now. But I had an opportunity to attempt Mount Rainier at age 15 and actually summit it at age 16. But of course, when you don't summit is when you learn the biggest lessons. In this case, boy, it's best to live to climb another day as opposed to taking on Mother Nature and the weather she can dish out. But I think about those experiences, and it's easy to be a baby boomer saying, we got to unplug kids from technology and so on. Warren and I have 2 children. They're no longer children. They're young adults. We're expecting our first grandchild here in a few months. Already got a picture. It's a pretty good resolution, amazingly, in utero. It's like, wow, that looks like some of the ones I shot with my Brownie bullet camera back when it was, person was out of the room. Anyway. So today, children are digital natives. They are comfortable with technology, and we can make an assumption that they're zooming in to talk with their friends or they're not paying attention, but they may just as easily be sending that picture that they just took of that really awesome, cool place to their friends and posting on Facebook and spreading it around to a million other people. That may easily be what's happening. So how do we embrace technology? John Jarvis is a champion of this. And as I worked as a volunteer for the national parks through the National Parks Conservation Association, through the Second Century Commission, which is a group of people working on the future of the national parks, at that time, which was maybe 2008, 7, 8, something like that, we didn't even have internet access available to employees in the national parks. I mean, that was not long ago. It's like 5 years ago. Amazing. So we have a lot of work to do. And some of the fun things that I've heard about here at the Schoodic Institute are engaging young people in using technology and bringing technology to the parks to enhance the visitor experience. So instead of having to update these signs all over the place, pretty soon your phone will know where you are. It already does know where you are. Maybe you don't know that it knew that, but it does. And it can say, here's where you are, here's what you're looking at, here's the mountain range you're looking at, here was the history, maybe here's some old pictures. All of those things are in the very near future. The National Park Foundation is working on a project to do just that in the celebration of the National Park Centennial in 2016, and I guess the Acadia's Centennial also in 2016, which is really extraordinary. So one of the things that I'm doing at the Department of Interior, and it's really building on the efforts across the board that had been there when I got there, and I want to make sure that we amp it up, and that is a youth initiative. If I think of my own childhood, it's not enough to just have a science class or a field trip that takes you out someplace. That's maybe planting a seed, but we got to water that seed to make sure that it grows. What you do in the Schoodic Institute when you get people out here for more of a residential program or multiple days. What happens when you get kids out picking up dragonfly nymphs and sending them out for analysis. As they get those results back, they understand the mercury in that water body. Maybe they go out and do more research and they see how that's changed over time. That's watering that seed that you've planted. And that's what's going to be essential if we have the next generation of environmental stewards that will be sitting in your places 30 years from now. So my goal is to engage more children in playing. I love, and I've been pushing on my colleague Arnie Duncan, in fact we're going to be together at the Passamaquoddy Indian Reservation here tomorrow, talking about Indian education, but I'd love to see a move toward bringing back recess. Recess, that's a place I think I learned more than anything that took place in a classroom. Conflict resolution, for sure. Creativity, games. You didn't exercise, you just ran up and down trees and ran around playing tag and created games and capture the flag, and then it was time to go back in the classroom and you could stand to sit there. You weren't bouncing off the walls because you'd had a chance to run around where there were no walls. We need to give kids an opportunity to play again. And national parks and urban parks, city parks, parks at every level are critical to that. Next, the best classroom is the one with no walls, and we need to have an opportunity to get more kids learning in our parks and our open spaces. Had a goal for 10 million children learning on our public lands, and the bad news is I set the goal too low. The good news is we're already doing 11 million, which I think is terrific, led by the National Park Service, but Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, other parts of Interior also stepping up to the plate. Next is service. You know, I've done a lot of service projects. I'm sure many of you have as well. You probably built trails and cleaned garbage and spiffed up some of these places that are important to all of us. And you never look at that place the same way. Dan Evans, probably the most famous politician in my state's history, three-term governor, senator, now 86 or 7, said, "Sally, whenever I drive along I-90, I look for my tree." I said, "Your tree, Dan?" And he said, "Yes. I planted a tree when I was a Boy Scout on what was the old Sunset Highway. It's now along the I-90 corridor. And that tree is now 76 years old." And that kind of activity, that service on lands, especially for young people, gives them an experience that will never leave them, will make them care about Acadia National Park like all of you do. And the last is work. We need to give kids opportunities to see a future in jobs on our public lands. And so we have the 21st Century Conservation Service Corps. We've been out raising private money. I didn't think I was going to come in this job and be on bended knee begging corporations for money, but I am. I've had some success. I hope to have more success. Would love to take checks. Don't want to compete with anybody else in here that is looking for checks. Schoodic Institute, you know, Friends of Acadia, National Park Foundation. I think we're all aligned in a common goal to get find opportunities to get young people working on public lands. So I'm pleased to say that in Acadia, you put forth a proposal, worked in conjunction with the Friends of Acadia. In this little fundraising effort we've got, we'll have close to $50,000 coming to Acadia for Youth Conservation Corps work, supported also by matching funds from the Friends of Acadia. So there's $100,000 that'll be provide jobs for a group of young people this fall. And those young people will not only do great work here, but it will give them an opportunity to know what's at stake and know that when they do become mayors and city council members and members of Congress or engineers or real estate professionals or bankers or whatever they choose to do, that they will care about this place. Because in a time of constrained resources, there never will be enough money to go around for education, for health care, for security, for infrastructure, for roads, for bridges, for universities, you name it. So where will the environment be? Where will Acadia National Park be on people's priority list if they've never felt welcome? I look out over the crowd. You're a wonderful looking crowd. You're not a crowd that's representative of the United States of America. And that's something else we need to work on, is making sure that this place that you love so much is also a place that everybody in Maine and in the United States knows are their public lands where they can feel welcome, where they can feel safe, where they can feel a part of nature. So I have a fundamental belief that as human beings, we need nature to be whole. We need nature to feed our souls. And as we move more and more into cities and urban areas, we leave nature behind. So let's reach out and take a child by the hand, bring them to a park of any size. Let's reach out to communities that are underrepresented around this room, but very representative of the wonderful diversity of the United States of America, and make sure everyone knows that our public lands are their public lands, and together we can craft a future that may not completely address the issues of climate change, but will adapt to the issues of climate change, that will not be as constrained in resources because people care, that will engage that next generation and future generations to come. Thank you very much. this is always risky in a group this size, but if I'm happy, I know we're at our appointed time. I'm happy to take a few questions from the audience if any of you have some, or suggestions, or great ideas, or large checks. All of them are welcome. Any questions out there? Comments, thoughts? We do have a couple of mics, or you can just shout it out. Ten, 9, 8. Oh, there's one right there. Oh, one right there too. Why don't we get that one because it's close to a mic, and we'll run a mic over to this one. Please.
Hi, I thank you so much. It's great to have you here, and I'd just like to ask you, what I myself am an activist, and I'd like to know what can we do to help you, to help our parks and what we have that's so wonderful.
So just give me a little more information. Activist, writ large, activist around Acadia.
I do nonviolent direct action,
Okay.
Mostly around environmental and social justice issues.
Okay, thank you. I'd say the best thing that people can do is sit around the table and help each other understand each other's views. You know, in this job, I came from REI. Everybody loved REI. Maybe LL Bean didn't, but most everybody loved REI. Actually, I think LL Bean even should have, because we're joined in connecting people to nature, and I always felt like REI's biggest competition was Best Buy. Amazon's in there too for a variety of reasons, but the couch and sedentary lifestyles and so on. One of the things that happened when I took this job is I realized it's a job full of conflict. And it's a job where people will tend to oversimplify positions on both sides. It's like, just stop leasing coal, right? Stop fracking for oil and gas. And they drove their car or flew their plane to get there to tell me that. And so the world is a pretty complicated place. And so I think that activism plays a role, because activism, raises the level of pressure. And raises a level of discussion, but also it tends to oversimplify. And I think that when we have people that have a common interest in a healthy planet, which we all do, right? We're all breathing the same air. We are all in need of clean water. We all want to have a place where our children can grow up and have a good experience. Getting people of different points of view in a room together to kind of work out positions is enormously helpful. So I'd say the Schoodic Institute would be a great place to convene that kind of a meeting. There's always a conflict between adding more lands to the federal estate and taking care of those that we have. That oversimplifies the situation. Here at Acadia, we have an opportunity, because of the generosity of a number of people, to accumulate land in what was the vision of Acadia National Park, and it's just been decades and decades in the making. But some people would say, why do you do that when you can't take care of what you have? In fact, it would actually cost Sheridan less if you didn't manage in-holdings, if it was all contiguous landscape. Getting people with those different points of view together in a room, I think, can help everybody understand each other's position. And I've seen that take place on a number of really difficult issues since I've been in that job, and that's very helpful. So get together with those on the other side and break bread, have a little wine, don't drink and drive. But I think you would find common ground as human beings, and I think that would be very helpful. Okay, one more question back there, sir, with the beard. Oh, is there another one there, Katie? Okay, then we'll do 2 more questions. Sorry.
Is this on?
Yes.
Actually, you just touched on what I was going to ask, and that is, this talk has been simply wonderful, and I thank you for it. And I had read that you favored leasing public lands for coal mining, which is really driving global warming, and also for fracking. And I just didn't know how they were compatible, what you've said here, what you stand for, and this other. You've just touched on it. I don't know what more you could say, really.
I'll say a couple more things, but thank you for the question. And it is difficult because we all are dependent on fossil fuels. Coal from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming is 40% of the electricity generated in the United States. You can't just cut it off. And so that's oversimplification of a complex issue. But what we can do is we can pass regulations that reduce the emissions from coal-fired power plants, and that's done over time. We can allow states to work with us on a really creative way to say, how do you want to go about reducing your carbon impact? Conservation, cleaner energy sources, supporting renewable energy. At the same time we do lease coal, we also have stood up over 50 renewable energy projects on public lands, utility scale projects on solar, on wind energy, on geothermal. We also find that both of those those have impacts as well. Avian impacts with wind energy, avian impacts and other habitat impacts with solar. Nothing is free. The best electrons are one we don't use to begin with. Changing things like the CAFE standards for cars is another way that I think you can have thoughtful regulation that actually provides economic incentive and regulatory incentive for the auto industry to apply its creative energies. And I think we could do the same to energy as well, so that we wean ourselves from a fossil fuel, carbon-based energy future to a more renewable energy future. I also can say that our colleagues at USGS are working really hard on carbon capture and sequestration and understanding, are there ways in this time when we are dependent on fossil fuels to capture some of that carbon from the atmosphere and to re-inject it underground in ways that reduce the carbon emissions. So there's lots going on, but it is complicated. It is a journey. It's a destination we will never fully reach, but it's a destination that we must strive for and continue to make progress. So we're committed to doing that as well. And then last question, gentleman in the beard.
I look around and see that I'm not the only bearded person here.
There's a lot of good beards here, actually.
But I do thank you for referring to me as a gentleman. Not everyone does. As I listen to your really marvelous talk that I wish could be echoed in every classroom in this country, I think of the decades that I spent as a classroom teacher before I retired, went to law school, and now practice law part of the time. And how even before the era of every child left behind, which unfortunately I believe we entered a few years back, I thought that there might be an opportunity when you next talk to Arnie Duncan, which you said will be tomorrow, that you raise some issues that will challenge the notion of most of the educational administrators that I've had the opportunity to work with, that the real education doesn't take place in the textbooks, within the four walls, within a stultified, rigid curriculum that must be adhered to under most current guidelines that I'm familiar with. And I taught for many years in and around the Philadelphia area, and had the types of experience that every time I and many other teachers that I knew of started teaching children beyond the textbook, beyond the four walls, using resources outside of the school and bringing outside resources into the classroom, ran afoul of many of the ideas that the administrators, both in the schools and in the central offices, had. So I am right there with you. But I fear that if you took your agenda into the classroom as a teacher, you would fail, not in the eyes and ears of the children, but to make it with the administrators, who would probably try to force you to adhere to a very rigid curriculum that is antithetical to the types of broad-based thinking that you're espousing. So I thank you for your thoughts and sharing them with us, but I hope that you can talk to Arnie Duncan tomorrow and over time and get him to get that message out that the whole idea of education goes well beyond the four walls of the classroom.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll take your comments. Well, I'm not an educator, but I do have the Bureau of Indian Education. It's one of the reasons I've asked for help from Arnie. If there's one group of children that we are really letting down as a country, it is Indian children. And I'm not okay with that. We've got to do something on my watch. So I've actually asked for the help from the Department of Education, along with many tribal leaders. And as I leave here, I tease my staff, they're picking Indian reservations in states that begin with an M, because I'm going from Maine to Minnesota to Montana. And we were talking about Mississippi as well. But it is to really dig in and understand why we are failing Indian children and what we need to do to provide them with strong academic background, but also culturally rich and culturally appropriate background that supports our nation's first people and their cultures that we worked so hard as a country through our education policy to beat out of them, literally, over many years. Arnie is, the last thing I would say is he's rigid. I'd say that he's very flexible, very committed to children, so I'll pass along your comments to him. I will say that my favorite movement is the No Child Left Inside movement. And so that was coined, I think, by Richard Louv and the Children in Nature Network. Richard Louv authored Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And I know as a child that would have struggled with nature deficit disorder if I had not been allowed to climb trees and run around outside, that it did wonders for my education with a little bit of beef jerky thrown in. So thank you so much, everybody, for everything you do here.
John, Sally, come on up a minute. First of all, we're so delighted that you and John, come on up here, son. We have a little something for you to take back home with you.
Can I have his hat?
I'm giving you a different hat. You're right. This is Schoodic Institute.
Oh, that was mine?
You get that one. But you also get... You're also each getting a bookend. And actually, I was going to give you each only one bookend, so maybe I could get you to come back and give you the other one another time, but I changed my mind. We're going to give you, these are granite bookends made right here, very close to Schoodic Institute. These rocks did not come off the beach. Anyway. You won't have to carry them. We'll have them shipped to your office. I would be remiss if I just didn't say one more thing. Schoodic Institute is a 501c3. We depend upon you for our livelihood and for our future. And if you can help us in any way, we'll greatly appreciate it. Now we have refreshments out here and a tour through the Rockefeller building and our facilities. Thank you all so very much for being here.